Hello, it's Laurie, your blockchain Brad, and today I have an exclusive interview with none other than Giotto. Giotto is well known as a DOT activist, and he's here today to explain all things related to his position in DOT itself and Polkadot. So Giotto, thank you very much for your time today.
You're welcome.
Just to start off, could you give us a brief background on all you've achieved, both in the Polkadot context and before, with your connections and your roles in crypto and blockchain?
Yeah, so I invested early in Bitcoin. I didn't do Ethereum ICO, but then I did DOT, I did Polkadot. I thought it was, let's say, a no-brainer because Gavin Wood, which was the CTO and I would say by far the main person behind the success of Ethereum, left Ethereum. And he also left Ethereum before it became really big. So I think the first Polkadot paper is from 2016, whereas the kind of ICO frenzy of Ethereum is 2017. So he kind of left very early, in some way, to create Polkadot. And I read the paper a long time ago, but the idea was to create this kind of bedrock, this kind of base layer where anything could be built and not just a smart contract platform. And already it was an attempt, or probably the best attempt, even till today, to solve the scalability problem, which we can see that Ethereum is still trying to solve, but maybe we discuss this later, since this is about my background. So I invested basically in Polkadot ICO, and I've kept since then. So it's 2017, now it's 2020. Well, it was late 2017, but let's say it's maybe, what, 5-6 years. So my experience in marketing was I worked in London for Skype in the early days in marketing, and then for another company called Viagogo, which I'm not sure if it's huge, maybe where you're from. It's probably big in Europe, even if I don't live in Europe anymore. But it was basically founded by the founder of StubHub, which you may be familiar with, which was acquired by eBay. And it was kind of doing the same, and I was doing marketing in Viagogo. So this is kind of my marketing experience, those two startups. Skype in the early days and Viagogo, which is founded by the same founder of StubHub, co-founder of StubHub.
I see.
This is my marketing experience.
And also to add to that, you've had some crypto experience with regard to roles such as ICO advisors. You've been a co-founder of many different projects as well. Some of those are listed.
But I would say
also.
Those are really minor things. So I wouldn't even consider. Yes, maybe I learned one thing or two doing those things, but I wouldn't really consider. Because here we look at the perspective of marketing. So from the perspective of marketing, I don't think. Sure, you always learn something here and there, but.
I see. Well, the good news is that you have had significant experience in the marketing sector in the mainstream, and we appreciate that information. Now, let's move to Polkadot, Giotto, because obviously you are very much involved. You are known as a DOT activist. You've started, creating waves in the space recently. So why Polkadot? Why is Polkadot something that is so important to you and something that you advocate to be involved with?
Well, so in my opinion, the thing of Polkadot is that, first of all, the reason I invested in Polkadot is because of Gavin Wood, and Gavin Wood is what he is because he's the founder of Ethereum. So I think, for example, I hope I'm not wrong, but the real technical paper of Polkadot, which is called the yellow paper, which has like all the specification about solidity, like how the gas works, and like it's just the name of Gavin Wood. There is no one else. There is no Vitalik. There is nobody. So at least from a technical perspective, then of course, maybe other people were good at doing the marketing or the partnership or the BD. But from a technical perspective, I would say, and maybe it's partially incomplete what I'm saying here, but Gavin Wood is really the creator of Ethereum. It's nobody else. And he then left, and he left early. So he left before it became big, but it became big, I don't know, for maybe by chance, or it was the right time, or for marketing, I don't know, but the technology is the same. So he left basically because he thought that this will not scale, and because the approach of Ethereum which is the approach that many other chains have followed. It's kind of what we can call the monolithic approach. So it's basically you have a single huge block, single huge piece, which is like a smart contract platform, and everything is there. And so it becomes problematic because you have this trade-off between the size and the decentralization. So some people, it's kind of the same issue between Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin. So you either give more value to decentralization, So it cannot become too big. You have to limit the number of transactions in some way to keep it decentralized, or you don't care about decentralization, so you just let the blocks become huge, and then yes, you can have a lot of transactions, low transaction fee, etc. So what Polkadot does is slightly different, at least because now they're going to release the new version. So, but in the original model with the parachain, etc., is the idea that you can very well have, let's say, logical silos. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but so there is no need to have this single monolithic block where you put everything. You can properly parallelize it in different silos because and then they can, of course, communicate, but they don't, because the thing is in Ethereum, for example, you have a proper queue in the sense that the transaction have to happen in a specific order. So you cannot, because something could affect the state of, let's say, some variable or something. And so everything has to wait for this to be complete. So it's the sequence is extremely important. So this usually is a bottleneck when you have this issue. I mean, maybe it's not super technically accurate what I'm saying, but I think it gives the concept of you have the issue of everything must happen in a specific sequence, and so you cannot do especially because it has to be decentralized. There is a limit, to the speed you can achieve, or you can run things in parallel. And so what now Ethereum is trying to do is to use the layer 2, but we can come back later.
Yes.
I don't want to deviate too much, but sorry, yeah.
And what's interesting, basically what you're saying is the reasoning behind why you were so interested in Polkadot was the technical value proposition and the robustness and the sophistication of the technology and the tech stack itself. So I do appreciate that you come from a tech-oriented reasoning, because I think a lot of people would presume you being a marketer and an expert at that you may not take that approach, but you clarified that. Now, what about marketing itself? Obviously, you have that experience, but why is marketing so important to Polkadot, and why is it such a focus for you?
Well, I think because it's probably the low-hanging fruit. So it's important to the extent that you don't see much marketing. So you see all the other chains being extremely aggressive in marketing with like influencers, everything. I mean, they make a lot of noise, and most of those chains are, I would say, nothing. It's like some of those chains are just EVM. It's like, imagine the irony if you will say that, for example, Gavin Wood, EVM stands for Ethereum Virtual Machine. So it's like, imagine the irony if Gavin Wood had left Ethereum to make another EVM. I mean, it will be like a joke, you understand? So, and some of those EVM may actually have a higher market cap, or at least at some point in time had, than Polkadot. So Gavin Wood left Ethereum to make something revolutionary and to fix a problem, and other people, they just say, hey, we could just make yet another EVM and just scale it. And scaling really just mean accepting the trade-off of less decentralized, because Ethereum could very well scale. It's a political choice not to do it, because they don't want to compromise on decentralization. They could just change one variable and allow the blocks to be much bigger, and it will scale, but then it will be less decentralized. So some people are just happy to make that compromise and say, who cares? I mean, it will probably crash in the end, but in the meantime, it's running. So something I want to say from your previous question before is a metaphor I like about, it's like the idea that I think Gavin Wood left Ethereum because in his mind, it's basically, imagine Ethereum is a train, it's a train that is running, and you realize that something has to be changed or to be fixed. It's very difficult to change the train while it's running. It's potentially better to start from scratch. But the question was why my focus is marketing, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So because it's the thing I can affect. So it's like I see those chains which are completely infinitely inferior compared to Polkadot. Some are just EVMs, so basically kind of not exactly a clone, but like kind of a clone of Ethereum with some twist here and there. And we have Polkadot, which is like a completely different level. And some people are comparing. I say, well, but maybe this other one is better just because they do a lot of marketing. And so because I understand marketing, and marketing is not very difficult, it's not rocket science. So I say, hey, maybe I can do it.
Right. And it makes a lot of sense. And it makes a lot of sense, Giotto, what you're saying in the context of a more advanced tech stack. When you're talking about parallelization, you're talking about interoperability, all the different advancements that are provided by Polkadot. In the context of marketing, some of the buzzwords that come up in the conversations we've had are things like awareness and communication. So do you want to touch on the value?
Which one, sorry, can you repeat?
Well, do you want to touch on, in the context of marketing, would you like to touch on the value of simply awareness itself, bringing to the fore the imperative of awareness and communication by way of marketing. Can you elaborate a bit more on why those things matter to you, bringing forward the agenda of awareness to the public, understanding the tech stack, knowing that it exists, bringing that to the fore so people better understand the sophistication of Polkadot itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think so of course, Polkadot exists and is an amazing product. It's by far the best, I would say, of any other blockchain project. But most people either don't know it exists, or they know it exists, but they don't really know what it does or what makes it uniquely different from the rest. So, I mean, yeah, I guess the first step of marketing is awareness, to make people at least aware that it exists, because most people, I mean, it's the idea of allowing people to make an informed choice. To make an informed choice, you must know all the options, and you must not just know the name and the logo and that it exists, but what the differences are.
Right.
So
And it does,
the first step of marketing is at least creating awareness.
and it does seem to be a case that education is also something you value greatly, because you want the public to distill that information, to process it, to understand it. So in the context of marketing, education, is that a key part of your agenda as well?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, let's say the idea would be good. So good marketing is the idea of distilling what is essential. So it's like, because of course it's an incredibly complicated product, so the average person cannot understand it completely, but you can potentially distill only what is relevant to them, so they can make a proper informed choice. They can say, oh, now I understand the main points of what it is, without, of course, understanding everything because it's too complicated. But still, they can understand enough, to make a proper informed decision. And I think the idea is, it's because I think a lot of people may have the misconception that marketing is about convincing. But really, marketing is about distilling the essential and allowing people to make a proper informed choice. Because at the end of the day, you want people, to make the decision for the right reason. If they make it for the wrong reason, because let's say they are pressured or they are misled or whatever, eventually they will not be happy. So marketing is really distill the essential, convey the essential to people, and they should, if they want to buy, or if they want to use it, or if they want to build on it or whatever, they should do it for the right reason.
Makes a lot of sense. So the reducing things, simplifying things, clarifying things is all part of quality marketing. And in that context, let's talk about what the term good actually means in the marketing frame. Now, good is often something used in crypto context, or perhaps overused, with phrases like good actors, good actions, good marketing. But in your opinion, what does good marketing actually mean?
Well, good marketing is basically what I said before. I would say it's distilling the essential, and it's kind of like, I would say, like bridging. It's like bridging between the product and the consumer. So it's like, because you may have at the end, technology exists to make an impact. So you may have an amazing technology, but if no one knows about it, if no one uses it, then it's useless. So the marketing is kind of the bridge between the product and, let's say, the consumer or the builder or the VC or whoever is the player that is involved. So this would be good marketing. But also, I would like to look at it from a perspective of being effective. So good marketing is also effective marketing. So it's marketing that works, because you could have completely ineffective marketing that just doesn't work. But it's really about allowing people to make an informed decision, to build a bridge between the product and the consumer, if we want to call it like this, or the user, or the anything we want to call it.
I see. Now, what about terms like efficiency in the context of effectiveness? How do you differentiate the two terms in the context of marketing?
Well, so effectiveness is basically about hitting the target. So, and efficiency is about doing it with as little resources as possible. But you also, the thing is, it's the idea of the overkill, it's like, I think it's kind of a military term. So it's like, you potentially you can shoot one person with just one bullet, but there is maybe a small chance he's not dead. So you just shoot 10 times because the cost of a bullet is so low. So an overkill will be not efficient, but effective. So the idea is, maybe it's better, to be a little bit wasteful, but to be sure you hit your target, than to be to the dollar, and then potentially have a risk of failure.
Right. So, Giotto, in the context of Polkadot, for example, how do we measure effectiveness when we are observing the work that's being done in the marketing frame, in the educational frame? How do we assess the value of different content creators, of different publications, of different efforts that are being made to put forth and educate about Polkadot?
Yeah, so this is actually very difficult. So often on the chat, a lot of people say, what are the KPIs? But it's like, it's a good question. What are the KPIs? So let's say you are doing this interview, for example, and you were funded by the Treasury.
That's correct.
How do we
Yes.
measure the value of this interview? Is it the number of views? But that's kind of very limiting because it depends who is viewing it. But you cannot really know who is viewing it. And is that interview alone going to affect the price today? Probably not. So the reality is it's actually very difficult to estimate, you know, the amount of contribution of every single factor. So you kind of use some heuristics. So it's like, I mean, a huge influencer probably will have some impact. You can observe that all the other projects that, in my opinion, are complete garbage, you know, they are doing well with some good marketing. So maybe since we have an amazing project, we could also do much better if we had good marketing. But it is very difficult to measure, yes, because you cannot always it's very difficult in when you do a lot of actions all together at the same time. It's very difficult to isolate the individual contribution of a single factor.
Yes, and I appreciate that. And I think in many discussions you've had with others, all of the efforts you've made in the .ami, which we're going to talk about later, you've always made it clear that there are several factors involved and you can't just nut it down to one single criterion. So I appreciate your response there. And thank you for making it clear that there needs to be more understanding, a more open-minded approach when it comes to this. Now, with regard to the political nature of OpenGov, and for those who don't know, there is a current model in the Polkadot Treasury system whereby people can vote and people can submit proposals, as I've done in the past, as you've mentioned. Now, some have argued there's a political state going on with regard to the OpenGov Treasury. And I wanted to ask you your opinion on this, because we've heard words floated out there like democracy, plutocracy. We've heard other things being said about it. But what's your opinion in terms of the political design in present time with regard to OpenGov?
Yeah, so my opinion is that there is kind of a little bit this ideology of democracy, as if, you know, democracy is, so, I mean, okay, let me say like this. So at the end of the day, in our daily life, we live in a democracy, depends on which country you are, but let's say maybe once every 4 years, because once every 4 years you get to vote. But most of the time it's not a democracy. So for example, you take risk. So you have money, you could either buy a car or you can go to university, and that will potentially change the course of your life. So I like to call it a riskocracy, like as in riskocracy from democracy. So at the end, it's about the risk you take. You vote in your daily life, you really vote with your risk a lot more than I mean, does it really affect you which government is ruling the country? Probably not. What affects you is your individual decision you make every day, and which is the kind of risk you take. So in open governance, it's a riskocracy. It's not about how much money you have. It's about how much dots you have, and because you may be a billionaire and, you know, and have few dots, you have no power, or you may have some fair amount of dots and be all in dot and you have power because you take more risk. And also it's interesting because in OpenGov there is an extra factor, which is the conviction factor, and basically you can multiply the value of your vote with something called conviction, and it makes your token locked for a long time, for more time. So if you vote with 1 conviction or 6 conviction, it's exponentially longer, the lock time. So you take a risk because if you really want the vote to go in a certain way and you use a high conviction, then your tokens are locked for much longer.
Right.
So
and in your
it's
context,
designed around risk.
And sorry to interrupt,
Yes.
but in your context, it really does show your own personal conviction. You are one of the largest dot holders in the world of Polkadot, and you've illustrated your conviction on chain. You've been pragmatic. You've always been an advocate for marketing, and you've shown that you're willing to show a high level of conviction for many who participated in the OpenGov Treasury system and put forth proposals, including myself, actually. So it is a case that you are demonstrating in real time the value of conviction and the risk that's involved there. So in that context, let's discuss a little bit more of the power play, that's often discussed in OpenGov with regard to this idea that few people have control at the top. You're referencing the riskocracy, and you're suggesting that ultimately there needs to be more value afforded to those who are willing to take risk at the higher level, or who are large dot holders. So do you think that people misunderstand just how much risk you take as a large dot holder and the position that you're actually in?
Well, I would say that people that have very few dots, of course, they are not risking much. And people that are not voting are also not risking much, because when you don't vote, you keep the option potentially to sell your dot tomorrow. But when you vote, then your dots are locked. So it's actually designed in some way it's designed to create friction. It is actually, there is a hurdle. If you want to vote and to have a significant impact, you have to bear a burden, which is to lock your tokens to prove that you really believe that this is the right way. You cannot just vote and then the next day sell your dots. So I would say, yeah, I mean, people that they just complain, they probably underestimate the risk. Maybe they think that you can, I don't know, you can decide without taking risk, or you can make money without taking risk.
Yes, it makes a lot of sense. Now, with regard to another term that you've often coined or referenced in the discussions in .ami and beyond, you've referenced the idea of wanting dot to be hot, to use your words. Now, what exactly do you mean, especially in the context of VCs or funds, and particularly the imperative where in order for VCs to invest, there needs to be something worked upon within the ecosystem itself. So what is your thoughts on your coin term of making dot hot?
Yeah, so hot, it would be a synonym for awareness, let's say high awareness. I would say the idea is that a lot of people in the chat, but not just in the chat, they have this idea that they say, we need builders, we need builders, we need builders, as if it's something you can control. So my personal philosophy is you focus on what you can control. Now, you cannot force at gunpoint developers to become Polkadot. So you just cannot. So, and also most successful projects are not the result of a solo developer in his bedroom coding something. This is very rare. So most successful projects are the result of an entrepreneur hiring a team of people and paying them salaries to develop a big project. And he needs funding. He needs VC funding. And so VC, they have the option. They can invest on project A or project B or project C. And they will also look, of course, on which ecosystem they are building. And they will look in some way how hot it is. And the thing is, how much awareness there is. And in some way, the idea is, why should the VC invest in an ecosystem that is not investing in itself? So they say, look at Solana. I mean, they are doing so well. They are clearly investing in their brand, in their awareness. Imagine it's like the idea of a wave, it's like, so you surf and the surfer leverage the waves. So the VC as his precious capital, he doesn't want to throw it away, and he wants to put his capital where it's going to be supported by a much stronger wave. So the idea is the project, is the ecosystem investing in itself? Is the ecosystem promoting itself so that the VC can feel comfortable enough to put his precious money, because they need to generate returns? It's not an idealistic pursuit. They need to generate returns, so they want to have as big as possible a wave to support their investment, so they will go on the ecosystem that invest in themselves.
Yes, and it makes a lot of sense when you consider the fact that in Parity and Web3 Foundation, they do invest in the tech stack in the developers themselves. And to your point about marketing, it does seem that would make sense to correlate that kind of investment that we've seen in the past with marketing investments. So now I guess the push forth from you and from the .ami and beyond is to really see that the ecosystem is investing in the marketing aspect of Polkadot, and by doing so, perhaps attracts the attention of VCs, funds, angels, and beyond. So it's an interesting idea, and you've clarified your agenda for the marketing in that respect of dot being hot. Now, what about this idea of oranges and apples? Obviously, that's an age-old adage, but when it comes to technology and when it comes to blockchains, we can sort of juxtapose very significant blockchain developments, L1s to L0s. But there's been this argument that we can't simply compare oranges and apples together, or apples and oranges, when we are considering the differences of different blockchain ecosystems. So what are your thoughts, given you've discussed a bit of this before and you've alluded to 2 other blockchains of Ethereum and Solana? What are your thoughts on this idea that we can't compare apples and oranges?
So it's not specific to Ethereum and Solana in this case, but it's because there are certain metrics that people use, like, for example, number of transactions, number of developers, number of projects built, number of dApps, etc., like adoption, what they call adoption metrics, and they kind of compare and they say, oh, look, this chain has a much more adoption than this other chain. But the thing is, most chains are basically smart contract chains. So a smart contract chain is just, again, the monolithic layer where you have this this smart contract language, and you can program some simple dApps, and people can interact with those dApps. So Ethereum kind of invented this. So Gavin Wood invented, but the thing is, so you have this smart contract, but the thing is, it's very easy to make a dApp on a smart contract. It's like, let's say, PHP, if anyone is familiar with that. So it's like you can make very simple scripts or very simple things, and of course you will have significant metrics because a lot of very junior developers may just play with it. So you will have a lot of developers, you will generate a lot of transactions because you will make a lot of small, simple applications. But most of those applications will be completely uninteresting. So it's like, imagine so for example, let's say the big applications we use, let's say Microsoft Word or Excel or, I don't know, Photoshop or those things, they are not written in PHP, they are probably written in C++, and it's a lot of effort to write it. So if you think about it, the degree of sophistication of what you can build with Polkadot is absolutely unique. So in Polkadot, let's say you can build Ethereum. That's like Moonbeam or a star. So in Polkadot is not a smart contract platform. It's something that is so flexible and so sophisticated that you can actually build a smart contract platform on top of it, like Moonbeam or a star. Whereas, so you can say you can build Ethereum on Polkadot, but for sure you cannot build Polkadot on Ethereum, because on the other ones, the smart contract platforms, you can just do smart contracts. You can do very simple, trivial, small DeFi stuff, which are completely uninteresting. But yes, on a in a cosmetic way, you will have better metrics because you will have plenty of pointless transactions about some smart contracts, DeFi smart contract or whatever, interacting with each other. But this is not very interesting. So yes, there will always be less dApps in Polkadot, because in Polkadot you can make very, very sophisticated applications. Like you can make an EVM just like that. In the others, you can just make simple smart contracts. So that's why I call apple to orange, to stress the fact that those, in quotes, adoption metrics are really stupid, because it's completely different.
Yes, and we also see the imperative of it being the interoperable architecture. The layer zero narrative that we've seen run forth for many years has genuine tech reasoning behind it. And obviously we see other smart contract platforms, as you've mentioned, some of them building upon within Polkadot's overall framework. And the whole architecture is designed to be more pluggable and multi-chain by design, particularly through protocols that enable that interconnectivity, even beyond Polkadot itself into other ecosystems. So you really do hit the nail on the head when it comes to not being able to make that direct comparison. It just simply isn't possible when you do make those comparisons from some of those popular, well-known chains referenced, and even beyond that when we compare that to Polkadot. So thank you again for clarifying that. In that context, are you excited about the future of Polkadot, given that it is such a sophisticated architecture, and we're already seeing a lot of hype and buzz and interest in new projects that are actually coming forth in the Polkadot arena?
Yes, I mean, so I was excited from day one. So let's say this has not changed. But yes, of course, I think the key, I mean, at least what I hope I can contribute through pushing a little bit the marketing, is really to ensure that more capital comes in, because at the end, it's a game of survival, in the sense that to get one amazing project, it's just like in startup investing. You need maybe 10 startups have to be funded so that one become really, really big, or maybe 100. So a lot of capital from VC has to go into Polkadot to produce a few amazing dApps or applications on Polkadot. So I would say what I feel I can control through my vote is to ensure that Polkadot invest in itself through marketing, and then that VC feel comfortable enough to deploy capital, and this capital will lead to great application, because the framework is there, the technology is there. but what is needed is the capital to leverage this infrastructure.
Makes a lot of sense. And also, when we see someone lead that out in the VC context, then others do tend to follow. And you're obviously colleagues with many different parties who are in that position in VC roles. So it's great to see that there's continuing support for Polkadot projects coming forth in both now and in the future. Now, one of the things that you've said before, Giotto, is you discussed an analogy. You wrote it on X recently as well, and it was this idea of an organism being assumably Polkadot, and then organs as another reference in the analogy. Can you just explain a little bit about that and what you're trying to explain?
Yeah, so the idea basically is a lot of people, I mean, in let's say in the Polkadot Treasury world, a lot of people seem to have this opinion that it's important that projects that are funded become self-sufficient. And I don't really see why, because it's like, why does everything has to be self-sufficient? It appears to me like basically adding an extra constraint that is really going to limit the option. So if you can only, I mean, let's say there are many things that could be beneficial to Polkadot, and some of them can become self-sufficient eventually, and some cannot, but they all will be beneficial to Polkadot. So the metaphor of the organism is Polkadot, and the organism, I don't know, let's say your mouth, you could argue that the mouth is self-sufficient because that's where the food comes in, but maybe your ears are not, but your ears are still beneficial to your body. So the idea that every single component has to be independent and self-sufficient, it doesn't seem to make much sense. The question is, does that specific organ, that specific piece that is being funded, is beneficial to the ecosystem as a whole? And if it is, then yes, it should be funded.
Yes, and I think you raised an important point of it being a good organ, because some have pushed back, I noticed even on X in response, and said, what about bad organs? What about a situation where perhaps, someone who's been entrusted with producing great content has actually moved in a different direction? So there is that question, of quality of the organs itself and the quality of the organism. But we can certainly move on and discuss, allude to that a little bit further in the interview. But I wanted to ask you about .ami. It's something that you actually founded, you created as a Telegram group. Can I ask you why you made that?
Yeah, so I started it. I don't even remember exactly, but I think I made some votes, and maybe people were kind of asking questions because the vote appeared irrational, but I don't remember exactly. So I decided to kind of open the chat, also to involve more. I think it started as something called grill chat, where so I went on Polk Assembly, and because I started voting, but I wanted to get some feedback about the specific project. So I made a chat called grill chat, and I will paste the link in the comments on Polk Assembly, saying like, hey, join this chat and the community can grill you. And so, of course, in Polk Assembly, both the person that posed the proposal will see the comment, but also the people that were willing to vote, they will see the comment. So they will both join it, will create a debate. And then it evolved to become more about marketing, because at the end, of course, the proposal I was more interested in were the marketing proposals. And then it also come with the idea that I wanted to, initially there were very few marketing proposals. So I want to kind of encourage people to post those marketing proposals saying that I will vote in favor. And then there is a little bit of debate that people say I was wasting money and whatever, which probably is a little bit true in the early days, but you need to be a little bit generous to show willingness, to fund marketing so that people start to apply. And now there is so much competition that actually most proposals are rejected because they are not good enough compared to how much choice we have.
I see. And
in just 2 months.
Yes, and I think that's an important point to make, Giotto, is that you are, in doing your own analysis and your own position and your own, I guess, your own vote, is that you do actually reject many of them. And many people may not be aware of that. There is perhaps this misunderstanding and misconception that you automatically everything, and that's just not the case. Now, one of the things that happened, I also noticed right from the outset, being involved right from that grill point you mentioned, is that there have been some changes made throughout the process, not just guidelines, but just directional change based on feedback, apparently. So are you someone who does listen to the community? Are you responding throughout this throughout this process, making sure that the community is involved in the decision making? You being a major dot holder is one thing, but it does seem that you engage more than most major holders when it comes to the community.
Yeah, I mean, I try to incorporate some of the feedback. So, for example, one of the we changed multiple times. Let's say the guidelines or the policies, whatever is the name. it's not a real policy. It's just me informing how I plan to vote so that people they don't waste their time to post a proposal. Because especially in the beginning, it was basically only me supporting marketing. So I wanted to express the guideline because someone will post a marketing proposal basically just with the expectation that I will vote in favor because I was encouraging marketing. And so if I just change my mind and then I don't vote, they have just wasted their time. So I inform, hey, I will only vote under those conditions just so that they know how to make their proposal. For example, I know the proposal, you cannot do it for a full year, start with a shorter time. Or, for example, there was the issue with commission. So some people, initially, I thought it was reasonable that people will get commission to it as introducer, but then for some reason, a lot of people didn't like that. So I say, look, and it's not really that, it's more about the idea that there shouldn't be two beneficiaries. So the beneficiary should be the influencer. And then if you have a strong relationship with the influencer, just ask him to pay you the commission for the introduction. But that also proved that you have a strong relationship to avoid spam, because at some point there was some influencer but were being contacted by 10 different people. So now it's like, well, if you have a very strong relationship with the influencer and you trust him, then you will introduce. If not, you will not. So it's really based on the feedback, but the feedback of the community, but also on what actually happens. Certain ideas work, others don't, and you have to quickly reassess and readjust.
Yes, I really appreciate that. And even in the context of the commission changes or the shift from the split addresses, it does seem that other prominent whales and delegates, even other perhaps major dot holders, were supporting the idea of that change. And perhaps that's the reason why other major voters did shift in support of different proposals.
Probably in part, yes.
Yes. Well, with regard to that, we see delegates, we see DAOs emerge, we see whales, and I don't like using that term. I'd rather say major dot holder. We see that a lot of dynamics happening, a lot of discussion, public, perhaps even in private settings with different DAO settings. What's your current position in that context? Do you liaise? Do you discuss? Are you interacting with different parties to better understand their position, to express yours prior to making proposals, or prior to voting,
sometimes, rather? I guess it really depends the degree of conviction you have. So if you have a high conviction, you don't really care. You just express your vote immediately. If you are not sure, usually you ask for someone else's opinion. And sometimes when you see that, for example, someone, maybe you feel they're hesitating, or maybe they have not voted yet, or they have voted in a way that you disagree, you try to convince them. But I mean, I guess it's just normal. So of course, the people that have a certain amount or have a certain delegation power, they know each other. It's just logical. And yes, of course, they interact, usually to exchange opinion and ideas. But I think it's not that you always manage to convince, but it's like you try, and sometimes you have a good case, sometimes you don't.
And I guess, it comes back to that idea, the riskocracy, in that you are trying to associate with those of similar risk levels as well to assess the value of a proposal, because you do have significant voting power. So appreciate your transparency there. Now, with regard to specific VCs, specific funds, there are some that are specifically and directly aligned with Polkadot and have been for many years. Do you have a special or unique relationship with any, particularly Scytale or Scytale? What's your role or position or relationship?
I am an investor in Scytale, yes.
Okay.
And of course, I know Mark well, but I would say that's it. I mean, I don't know what you mean by special relationship. Yes, I am an investor in Scytale.
Right. So I appreciate, again, that transparency, because it helps us understand also the interests that do align, in that clearly the VC Scytale is trying to uplift the performance of Polkadot overall as an ecosystem, as a tech stack, and they're putting their money where their mouth is. They're investing in those things, and you clearly are doing the same as an investor in Scytale. So it's just great to know those kind of alignments of interest. And you moving forward, is your plan to also discuss what kinds of things Scytale are investing in the future? Would you support those kinds of projects?
But I don't really know. I mean, it's not that I mean, Scytale is completely independent and they invest in whatever they like. Yeah. It's not that they ask I mean, maybe they will show me a deck once in a while, but it's not very common. It's like, I mean, Scytale is completely independent.
I see.
But what was your other question?
Well, it was just a case of whether or not you thought it was beneficial for the ecosystem where these different parties at that level are having discussions, sharing ideas, sharing thoughts on projects that are coming up and coming, because you are part of that riskocracy. You are a major dot holder.
No, it's a riskocracy.
Riskocracy.
It's not aristocracy.
Sorry, riskocracy.
The one that are willing to take the risk. Well, I mean, Scytale is willing to take the risk, of course, but it's a different kind of risk. It's probably more risky what they do because they invest like seed stage or early stage in specific projects. Yes, most of them in the Polkadot ecosystem. But I think at the end of the day, I mean, Scytale is concerned first is concerned mainly about its own performance. Of course, it supports Polkadot because I guess it has its network there. But I mean, Scytale has to be also concerned about its own It's not that Scytale is a vehicle to support Polkadot. I mean, people invested, including me, and they expect some return. So Scytale has to invest intelligently.
Absolutely. And from my understanding, Gavin and Ed Hess were also advisors to that particular VC. So there's always that common interest in Polkadot there. Moving across to agencies, we see that being a common thread right now in the discussion of marketing. The emergence of several different kinds of agencies now exist within the frame of .ami and beyond that. And we assumably there'll be a lot more coming in the coming months. But to ask you, why agencies? Because you do support that idea of building them into the marketing approach and agenda. Why do they work? Why not just continue that individual approach to OpenGov?
Yeah. So there are multiple reasons. The first one is that some people complained that there were just too many proposals, so that the Treasury was just being filled with proposals, and I guess they were not pleased with that. The second thing is that you also have to, after they get the money, you still have to manage the relationship. You have to check, are they really publishing the videos? Are they really doing what they were paid for? And so I think the agency, of course, the agency charges a commission, so it's a little bit more expensive, even if actually the agency has a better expertise to determine what is the fair market price. So potentially it may be even with the commission of the agency, it may be a better deal because they have more experience in negotiating rather than some guy just posting a proposal and it's yes or no. The agency can negotiate, but it's also because the agency will act as a filter. So the agency has the expertise to say this one is good, this one is not good. They will check, for example, on the quality of the followers. They have some specific tools, to check, is it bots, is it like humans? Like they have some tools to basically make a better assessment of the quality of an influencer, especially the smaller one, because the really, really huge ones is about reputation. So the one that are so big that it's about reputation, they can post directly. But the one that are not so huge that everyone knows about them, you have to do some due diligence. So the agency will do the due diligence, and they will also aggregate many proposals, so it consumes less. There are not hundreds of proposals all at the same time about marketing, but there are just a few, and they kind of put their face and their reputation. So they have an incentive to be careful, because if it turns out that there is a crappy influencer in the mix, or that the work is not delivered, or that it's someone that the Treasury overpaid, that agency may lose the future vote, so they may lose a big opportunity. So I think for all those reasons, it makes sense to use the agency.
Yes, and we've already seen, and I'm sure that you've noticed it as well, there's been some pushback from some members of the community with regard to some of the big influencers that have gone directly across to the OpenGov proposal scenario. And obviously, everyone has a subjective opinion on that. That is just the case. But there has been some strong sentiment put forth about certain large influencers that have a popular agenda, have a lot of influence, but perhaps have a different kind of reputation depending on the person who is making that claim. So we do see some pushback in that environment. But I wanted to ask you about amplification as well, because that's another thing that I've actually learned from you. Why is amplification an important aspect of marketing?
Well, so amplification is important. I will explain also what I mean by amplification, because I then realized that it may have different meanings. But so the initial logic was that there would be, let's say, some content, some really specific top quality content creators specialized in Polkadot, like, for example, Kusamarian, that they will make top quality educational content. But by definition, they will not have a large reach. And in some way, it's not their fault, because a lot of people say, oh, Kusamarian is getting a lot of money, but it doesn't have much views. But it's not his fault, because the number of views it has depends on the size of the Polkadot ecosystem, because he only talks about Polkadot, but he does it in very, very much detail. He talks like every week, I think, about governance and everything. So the idea is we have to bring more people to Kusamarian. So then I thought, well, we could go to very large influencers, which have a very high reach. Of course, they will never go into the same degree of detail, but it's kind of a funnel. So people will discover that Polkadot exists through the large, high-reach influencer. And then once they have discovered that Polkadot exists, they will discover Kusamarian and potentially follow him and watch his video maybe every week or whatever. So this was the original idea. So Kusamarin is already there producing top, like, let's say it's about, so Kusamarin will be the retention aspect. So you have certain top quality influencer where it's about retention. And then you have other influencers, which are very large, a very large audience, and it's about acquisition. And so you acquire users with the large influencer and you retain them through, let's say, Kusamarin. But then I got this idea of amplification, and amplification is basically the idea of directly amplifying a high quality content creator. So for example, Kusamarin makes a video. Maybe instead of, you can go to a large influencer to ask him to make a video in general about Polkadot, and through the funnel eventually you reach Kusamarin, but you could potentially ask, I don't know, 100 big influencers to just retweet that video, so people will immediately discover Kusamarin. So the amplification is kind of a shortcut. So it's just two different strategies. At the end, you have to, in that funnel, you have to send people to the high quality, to the specialist content creator that is going to do the retention. And there are just two ways to do it. One is through a large, high reach content creator that then people will discover Polkadot and then go to Kusamarin, or you can just, when Kusamarin posts a very good video, let's say, for example, Gavin Wood interview or something really interesting, you can amplify it basically by having people, for example, retweet it. So they're not really changing the content. They're not producing new content. They're just giving a bigger reach to some quality content which is already there.
I see. And that would require arguably submission onto on-chain via the OpenGov proposal system for that particular agency or that particular company who specializes in amplification to then go and do that kind of work. And we're seeing that already through Addressable, I think, is one of the more experienced.
No, Addressable is slightly different. So, I mean, it's also a form of amplification. So there are two. So Addressable is basically purchasing ads on Twitter. Okay. So you can buy, a tweet can basically become an ad, can be advertised by paying. And then other agencies, they just have a list of influencers that can retweet stuff. So it's two different. One is about, Addressable is about ads, and the other is about retweets.
Got it. So clearly, once again, harps back to that discussion we had at the beginning about education being a very key part of your marketing objective. Now, with regard to transparency, we were talking about agencies. Are you an advocate for transparency when it comes to those agencies existing now and beyond? Because there's going to be a lot more of them. Do you feel that they should be transparent about their role in what they do? Are you an advocate of full transparency when it comes to the actions that agencies take?
But can you explain what you mean transparent about their role?
Sure. So there is the question currently now whether or not some can act covertly, act behind the scenes, and also have commissions that aren't stated as well. Are you an advocate for full transparency of the agency, letting people know they exist, letting people know them by name?
No, but the agency on the OpenGov, they post with their name. They say, I am agency XYZ. This is the amount I request. This is the list of the influencers, and this is what they will provide. So they don't disclose the commission, but it's probably a market price because at the end, the agency is reselling you a service. So it's not technically a commission. They are buying a service from the influencer. They are reselling it. So the introducer is a commission. But when you go to the shop, let's say, and you buy a phone, there is no, there may be a commission to the salesman, but the shop is just making a profit. So of course, the agency is making a profit, but no, they don't disclose what the profit is. But the thing is, it doesn't matter because there are many agencies anyway that compete with each other, so they cannot make an unrealistic profit. They make, I don't know, I guess it's probably 10, 20, maybe 30%. It also depends the amount of work involved and how close they are with the influencer. But of course, the agency is going to make a profit. But I wouldn't call it a commission. It's just the profit they make on buying, let's say, the influencer and reselling the influencer.
Yeah, I think you raise a really good point. And the fact that the OpenGov system is transparent by design, that sets Polkadot apart from all of the other ecosystems where we do know of covert systems and agencies and agents who have a long list of influencers, but no one really knows exactly the details of that because it isn't like OpenGov where everything is on chain and people can go and read the information on those proposals. So it is clear, that because you're voting in that context, you're supporting many different parties, including agencies. It will be interesting to see in the future how many more evolve. With regard to Treasury spends, Giotto, I wanted to ask you about the value for DOT in that, in the context of how do you evaluate proposals and how do you assess the value of the spend and determine whether or not it was worthwhile. So, for example, say in my case or in many other cases, we submit a proposal. We've been fortunate enough to receive funds to continue working, but in terms of future, proposals that come forth for any party. How do you assess prior to subsequent submissions, especially with the self-sufficiency argument you've explained? How do you assess the merit and the worth of their work? Is there a criteria sheet that you use, or is there some sort of system to evaluate things?
Yeah, so it is, of course, very difficult. As we were saying in the beginning, the idea that it's difficult to estimate the individual contribution of a specific factor into something. But the thing is, we are not there yet, because in reality, well, you are one of the exceptions that you got the funding and you already started, but you're really one of the first. Like, for example, the big ones, they recently just won. So we have not yet even started to see the impact. So I think it's true. I mean, this chat exists is like 2 months, I think.
Right.
And it roughly takes 3 weeks for a referendum to run. And in the beginning, there were very few proposals. So recently, for example, there's the proposal of like Raul Pal and Mario that passed a few days ago, but they just passed a few days ago. So we don't really know what the impact is going to be. So but of course, I assume there will be ways to look, like how much like awareness they can create, how many views they generate, how much buzz they generate. Of course, those are not exact, precise measurement that you can make, but you can get a rough idea. Let's say this is no different than the events. I mean, let's say Polkadot is present to many events, and can you really estimate if it was worthwhile? Well, it's difficult, but in general, you see, were there many people in the event? There were not that many people. How big was the booth that you had, and what about your competitors? So it's mostly heuristics, I think, but it's still too early. As of now, we cannot do it because we have not yet starting to see the deliverable. It's yet to come in the next few months.
It's going to be exciting to see and get that feedback as well. What about to the critics out there? Here's an opportunity for you to silence them. There is some pushback from some, arguably, that because you are a large dot holder, you've been invested in Polkadot for quite some time, and now you've come out with the .ami and a clear and very strong marketing agenda. What do you say to critics who say, oh, you only want to increase the price, you're only here to really uplift the price because you have such a large stake in Polkadot? What do you say to those people?
Yeah, so first of all, I would say if they don't care about the price, they probably don't have enough dots. But beside that, which is kind of like more like a joke, I would like to say that, of course, if you do the marketing effectively, the price will probably increase, but that's more like a side effect. It's not really what you're chasing. What you're chasing is the adoption, that is a real sustainable growth. But the thing is, the adoption in this case, as we said before, the VC, they want to see that the ecosystem invest in itself. And only then they will trust to invest in the ecosystem. So the marketing is needed to reassure the VC that it is safe to invest in projects that build on Polkadot. And if you don't have anything building on Polkadot, Polkadot will probably die. Whereas if a lot of projects build on Polkadot, it will be a great success. Can this affect the price in the meantime as a side effect? Probably yes, because some people will speculate and say, so now they're investing in marketing, so VC will start to invest, so project will be successful. So they try to anticipate that and they buy. But this is more like a side effect, because the intended purpose is to ensure that VC feel comfortable investing in projects. So a lot of stuff get built on Polkadot. So it has a real organic growth.
Makes a lot of sense. And clearly, once again, it harks back to that point you've made consistently throughout the interview, that you're focused on education, on awareness, on making sure that understanding Polkadot is at the forefront of the marketing push that you're leading, and perhaps moving into a situation where you don't have to lead in the future. But it is exciting to see some of the initiatives that have come forth. Now, in terms of the future of Polkadot, especially in the marketing context, what do you see, in 6 months' time to a year? What do you envision will happen through the work you've done, through the work that many others are doing also to support this idea of awareness and education and spreading the narrative of Polkadot?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult because, I mean, this chat exists since 2 months, and we went from debating, I don't know if to vote for Cusamero or not, to getting Raul Pal in 2 months. So how can we predict 6 months? It's like, I think it's completely impossible. It will just be saying something random, but why? It's like, I would rather say that I have no idea.
Right. Are you concerned at all, just to add on to that as another question, are you concerned at all about Treasury spending, considering that some of these bigger influencers, you mentioned Raoul Pol as one, they do cost a lot, and obviously they have, hopefully, a significant effect for Polkadot and spread more awareness. But are you concerned at all about the magnitude of the spending on a monthly basis in comparison to, say, for example, the burn and the income that's generated for Polkadot?
So first of all, those numbers are completely arbitrary in the sense, and there is an arbitrary number in the Treasury. But without going too much into the technical stuff, the thing I want to say is, you see, if the Treasury was like in a normal company, the Treasury will be in dollars. Mm-hmm. So, okay, because let me just say this another thing first. So it's not about price, but it's always about price versus value. So it doesn't really matter how much you spend. What matters is what you get for what you spend. But besides that, the thing is, if the Treasury was in dollars, then it will mean that potentially you have the option to either spend now, or you could always spend tomorrow. You may think that you may get a better deal in a year or in a month, and you can delay the spending. But in this case, the Treasury is in dots. So the thing is, so you cannot see it like a pile of cash. It's more like a living organism, in the sense that if you have a cat, you cannot say, oh, cat food is expensive today, let's not feed the cat for 3 weeks, and we will feed it next month. It will probably be dead. So the thing is, a living organism is either going through a positive spiral or a negative spiral. A positive spiral basically means that, let's say, the price is going up, so we are funding a lot of projects, which makes the price go even more up, which we fund even more projects, or the opposite. So it's like, let's say it's not going very well, so we cut the spending, so there are even fewer projects, so we cut the spending. This works also in a normal business, yeah? So it's like the business is going good, so you reinvest in growth and you have more money, you invest more and more, or you keep cutting costs, the quality of your product drop, and then you lose even more customers, so you cut costs even more, etc. So realistically, almost everything is not static. It's not like a statue, like a stone. It's a living organism. So the value of the Treasury, the value of the Treasury depends a lot more on the price of dots than the number of dots in the Treasury. So if dot is worth 50, the Treasury is 10 times more. If dot goes to 1, it's worth 7 times less. You understand? Roughly, yes. I don't know the price today.
Right. So essentially what you're saying is that the more robust the ecosystem, the deeper the Treasury becomes. Is that a fair assessment?
The thing is, not necessarily, but because the Treasury is recreated anyway all the time through inflation. So the Treasury, to some extent, is infinite, because I don't know if it's every week or what, but because there is the Polkadot protocol generate a fixed inflation. Some goes to reward the people that are doing staking, so they are securing the network, but some goes to the Treasury. And also the Treasury also burns, so to avoid the Treasury being too big, potentially for maybe someone will do a huge spend and waste too much money, the Treasury constantly gets replenished through inflation, but a certain portion get burned to try to maintain an equilibrium. So it cannot be compared to like a bank account, because in a bank account, it doesn't get constantly replenished, it doesn't get burned, and it doesn't depend on the price of something else. So it's more like an organism. It's like, of course, if you eat too much, maybe you get too fat and you cannot run, so you have to lose a little bit of weight so you can run. But if you get too thin, imagine like in the Stone Age, you need to run to catch animals to eat. If you are too thin, you don't have enough energy. But if you are too fat, you cannot run. So you try to maintain this equilibrium, but you have to constantly do something. Basically, the option of inaction is not available for organisms. You understand? So you cannot say, here is a pile of cash, let's just sit on it because next year there is a better opportunity. You have to spend it now.
Yes, and it makes a lot of sense what you're saying. And I think perhaps many people out there who don't understand the nature of inflation, the way in which the whole Treasury system and model is designed, perhaps it would behoove them to go and look more into it and explore that so they understand the equilibrium factor as well. Now, one last thing I wanted to ask before we close the interview today, Giotto, was recently you referenced the idea of a Polkadot meme coin. Can I ask you why, that's something that is piquing your interest right now? What's the value in a meme? Is it a marketing strategy?
Well, so it's just an idea, really. It's an idea that comes from the fact that basically everyone else is doing it. And of course, Polkadot is unique because it has governance, it has treasury, and it has the voting system. And so it's more like an experiment. So it's the idea of, can Polkadot, as OpenGov and Treasury and the voters, create a meme coin? So creating in the sense of, well, first technically through I guess it's through a referendum. I'm not 100% sure yet about the technical side, but creating it on, let's say, on the network, the specific token, distributing it to the dot holders. So it's kind of an airdrop to the dot holders. But then potentially voting for marketing. So the DAO, because at the end, Treasury is like a DAO, the DAO could vote, say, hey, let's allocate this amount of money to this agency to promote that coin. It's kind of the idea. It's kind of, I would say it's an experiment. It's an experiment to see if an advanced DAO like Polkadot with a treasury and a governance system can actually create a meme coin. Because the meme coin is the simplest thing you can create, because it's a coin which is only based on a meme. It doesn't have specific functionality. But I think the answer is yes. I think it's possible. I want to see if it's going to happen. Of course, if a proposal like this comes, of course, it has to be a serious proposal. So I think the key point is that for a fair meme coin, it has to be distributed to all the dot holders. So if it's something where, some early investors have a lot of tokens, and it's probably not going to be good. But anyway, it's not for me to decide. All I can do is vote. But I think it will be great to see, to create a meme coin, and then marketing agencies, for example, can compete and post proposal about how to market this meme coin, which anyway is owned by all the dot holders, and the dot holders can vote and say, yes, this was good, this not, and then something happened, basically bottom up, instead of being some guy that decide everything. It's like the community say, okay, so maybe 10 different marketing agencies are going to post 10 different proposals about how to market this meme coin, and 5 will be voted in favor and 5 will be voted against.
Right. Well,
so it's kind of an experiment.
Yeah, I think that's the great way to explain it. It is an experiment. We've seen the likes of other meme coins and other ecosystems be very popular, and also be in the same breath a bit of a literal meme, a little bit of a joke. But because it's a financial asset, it does have financial implications. It will be important to acknowledge that and see how that unfolds in the future. But just lastly, if people want to contact you, Giotto, if they want to discuss things further, if they want to contribute to the .ami or anything like that, what do you suggest they do? What's the best way to get involved?
Well, join the chat, and usually most of the time on the chat, or they can also write me on Twitter.
Okay, well, I'll put the links below of both of those for you. And just lastly, is there anything you'd like to add to the interview? Perhaps we've forgotten something, or perhaps there's something you're really passionate about, just to add, more weight to your argument, your position, and obviously your support for Polkadot.
Yeah, I think my core idea about marketing is that all the other projects, they are kind of maxed out on marketing. That is, if they do more marketing, they would probably get very little benefit because they are completely maxed out on the marketing. Whereas Polkadot is basically on the floor. And the funny thing is that the market cap is kind of comparable. It's lower than Solana, but the others, it's kind of in the same range. So the others are maxed out on marketing, and Polkadot is at the floor of marketing in terms of marketing, but the market cap is roughly comparable. And I think it's if you want to use a metaphor, it's as if you use a balloon, So it's like Polkadot as a balloon without air is as big as the others, which are fully inflated balloons. So I think Polkadot has really a lot of potential because it has a similar market cap, but it's at the complete floor level in terms of marketing, whereas the others, they are basically completely maxed out on marketing, and they just cannot do more marketing, or if they do, they will have very limited impact.
I see. Well, clearly you are very much excited for the potential of marketing in that context, given that you can regard Polkadot being at its marketing floor. You are a dot activist, as you have written on your X profile as well, and you've been a co-founder. You've had a lot of marketing experience, as you've mentioned. Thank you very much, Giotto, for making the time today. I really do appreciate it, and hopefully we can catch up again and discuss other aspects of marketing, or even other things that you're engaging with as you move forward, as you continue to push the agenda for better understanding of Polkadot, more awareness, more education. It's exciting to see what you've sparked. It's certain there's a fire that seems to be burning right now in the marketing aspect and context, and hopefully that grows in a very positive way for people to better understand the work that's been done by Parity, by Web3, by Gavin, by Rob, and many others. And I wish you all the best in your own endeavors, and hopefully once again we can catch up and speak more.
Okay, that's great. Thank
you very
you.
much. Thanks for your time.